Ever felt like you've given everything to your family, only to be forgotten when it matters most? You've supported them through thick and thin, paid bills without being asked, and always showed up when they needed you. But what happens when your sacrifices are ignored and someone else gets everything? Prepare for the shocking truth behind a betrayal that's about more than money. It's about family, respect, and your own self-worth. For years, I had been the steady one, the one who always showed up without hesitation, the reliable daughter who always made sure things got done, whether it was covering the bills when my dad's back surgery put him out of work, or sending money to help my parents when the market crash wiped out half their retirement funds. Even last spring, when the furnace broke down just as a cold snap hit, I wired the full cost to the contractor before they had even asked. No questions asked, just done. That day, though, I wasn't there to fix anything. I wasn't playing the role of the problem solver. I was just helping Dad sort through a stack of health insurance paperwork, something that had become almost a ritual for me. My dad, Gerald, was never quite able to get the hang of the printer-scanner combo after all these years. He called me the tech expert, but my work had nothing to do with IT. I'd spent the last decade in project management, far from tech support. I started sorting through the papers on the dining table, some medical records, a couple of Medicare forms, utility bills, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I saw it. A thick, cream-colored folder, neatly labeled in my mom's handwriting, Estate Plan Final Copy. I knew I shouldn't open it. I'd just paid their property tax bill, $2,178.41, the week before. I was planning to pick up their blood pressure medications on my way home, but my curiosity got the best of me, so I opened it. Inside, their will was notarized 2 months ago. The house was fully paid off. Their retirement accounts, a life insurance policy, everything was going to my brother Mason, the 29-year-old who still lived at home, who had dropped out of college twice, who spent his days jamming in the garage, posting music videos that hardly anyone watched. His dreams of being a musician had been more of a hobby than anything serious. Yet there it was, his name on everything. And me, I was a footnote, a single line. We love both of our children equally and trust them to care for one another. That was it. I wasn't mentioned for all the sacrifices I had made. No acknowledgement for the thousands I had quietly transferred into their accounts. No thank you, not even a nod toward all the times I'd fixed their problems. Just a polite dismissal. I stood there, frozen, holding the paper. My hands didn't shake, but my breath caught in my chest. I was stunned, more than I had ever been before. When Dad walked back in with his coffee, he didn't notice right away that I was holding the will. He asked if I was getting through the stack of papers. Without a word, I held it up to him. "Is this how it is, Dad?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Everything goes to Mason?" He froze mid-sip, the cup hovering near his lips. He stared at me, a long, exhausted sigh escaping him. He knew exactly what I had found, and it wasn't the first time I had caught him in a lie. "It's not what you think," he said, almost defensively. I didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that would change what I had just read. Then, in his usual way, he mumbled something that only deepened my sense of rejection. "We thought you'd understand, Danny. You've always done well. You've always had things figured out." It was the same message they always gave me when they didn't want to explain. You don't need anything. I was the one who had always done well, but that was the excuse, the unspoken justification for ignoring me when it counted. I didn't press further. I left the folder on the table and walked outside, needing to breathe, needing to escape the suffocating weight of it all. I sat on the porch swing, the one I'd fixed myself 2 summers ago. When the railing had given out, Mason had once told me he couldn't afford the repairs, so I paid the contractor myself. Back then, I didn't mind. I was always the one who stepped up. But today, something had shifted. As I sat there, staring at the oak tree across the yard, memories flooded my mind. Mason had carved his initials into that tree when he was in high school, along with the initials of a girl he'd dated for a few weeks. I remember thinking, was he ever really invested in anything? That girl, that tree, his music, none of it had ever seemed as important as the life I had been building for all of us, quietly and without asking for recognition. I thought about all the little things I had done for them over the years, the car insurance I paid when they couldn't make ends meet, the groceries I picked up when they forgot, the times I called the credit card company to fight late fees, and the big things like wiring $11,000 from my savings to cover their mortgage when they fell behind 4 years ago. Each time I did it because I wanted them to feel safe, to feel cared for. But now all that love, all that effort seemed to mean nothing. Mason had his music, his dreams, and a free pass to do whatever he wanted. I had a life built on sacrifice, on stepping up when no one else would. But I realized something sitting there on that porch swing. I wasn't just invisible to them, I was being used. I didn't go back inside. I stayed on that swing, feeling a shift deep in my bones. The hum of the scanner from inside the house was faint in the background, but it felt like the last sound I'd ever hear from this place. Minutes later, Mom stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing that same pale blue cardigan she always wore when something heavy was about to be said. It was the same cardigan she wore when she gave me a gift card for Christmas, and Mason gave her a burned CD. I remember thinking, how is this my life? How is it that after everything, I'm still not enough? Danielle, she said, her voice soft, but not as soft as it used to be. We didn't mean for you to find out like this. I didn't answer. I didn't want to say anything that would let them off the hook. Mom sat beside me, but I didn't look at her. I stared straight ahead, hoping to block out the feeling of abandonment creeping into my chest. It's not that we don't love you, she continued, her hand trembling slightly as she rested it on mine. Mason's had a rough time. You've always been steady, Danny. You always have been. Steady, strong, reliable. They were the words that once made me feel good, made me feel like I was doing something right. But now they felt like cages, words meant to keep me in line, to make sure I'd always be there, no matter what they took from me. I pulled my hand away. You could have told me, I said, my voice steady. You could have asked. Her eyes dropped to the yard. She wasn't even looking at me anymore. I could feel the wall between us, and I knew there was no way to tear it down. We had to co-sign for Mason, she said quietly, as if speaking softer would make it hurt less. He needed the help. It wasn't the words, it was the way she said it. Like it wasn't just an act of support, it was an obligation. I could hear the weight in her voice. How much? I asked. 35, she whispered. I stood up. The wind picked up, and the old wind chime on the porch tinkled once before falling silent. My heart wasn't angry anymore. It was just tired. You didn't choose him because he needed it, I said, looking at her. You chose him because you already owed it to him. Her eyes widened, but I wasn't waiting for an answer. There was no answer that would fix this. I didn't text, I didn't call, I just stopped. That week, I canceled the auto deposits for their utility bills. I deleted the reminder to reorder their medications. I paused the grocery deliveries that I had set up to show up every Thursday at 4 p.m. It wasn't a dramatic move. It wasn't a big announcement. It was just a shift, quiet, subtle, and permanent. I thought they'd notice. At first, I figured it would be immediate. A call, a text, a question about why I wasn't there. But a week went by, and nothing. No one seemed to care. By the second week, I started getting messages. "Danielle, the water bill is higher this month. Can you check the account?" Came from Dad. "Mom said we're out of the low-sodium crackers you usually bring," Mason texted. I didn't respond. They weren't concerned, not yet. They probably thought I was just busy or moody or tired from work. Maybe they thought I needed space. But deep down, I knew they didn't truly care. It was just routine, an assumption that I would always show up. I had been the reliable background noise in their lives for so long, they couldn't even imagine a world without me. And then, the tone shifted. "Danielle," came the next message from Mom. "The mortgage is due. Can you send what you usually do?" No hello, no how are you. Just a number, a need. I stared at the message, and I knew it was time. I took a deep breath, typed my response, and hit send. "Ask Mason, it's his house now." The silence that followed felt louder than any words could have been. The response didn't come immediately. 5 minutes passed, then an hour, and still nothing. But then my phone buzzed again. It was Mom. I let it ring. Then another message. "Please don't be like this. We need to talk." It was almost like a plea, a desperate cry, but it didn't move me anymore. The truth had already been spoken, and there was nothing they could say that would make it better. I wasn't the answer they thought I would be. Mason chimed in later that evening. "Danny, don't make this a big deal. Just help them like always." Like always. The phrase stung. It was the same phrase I'd heard 1,000 times. They'd always relied on me to be the dependable one, the person who would never say no, the one who would always put their needs before my own. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I wasn't just their backup plan anymore. I was a tool they used when they needed something, and they had no intention of ever making me feel like I mattered. So I wrote back, "You're the one they chose, Mason, so be the choice." He didn't reply, and I didn't expect him to. The next morning, a transfer request came through, $3,200. The exact amount of the overdue mortgage and penalties. No message, no explanation, just the number. I declined it immediately. A minute later, my phone rang, and then again a few minutes after that. This time it was Dad. "You'd let your parents go homeless?" his text read. I almost laughed at how absurd it was. Homeless. No, they weren't homeless. They were just uncomfortable. For the first time, they were learning what I had been carrying all these years without asking for help. It was the burden of being the one everyone leaned on, and now, for the first time, they were realizing they couldn't count on me to do it anymore. So I turned my phone off. They didn't lose me when they wrote me out of the will. They lost me when they assumed I would keep giving, without ever questioning or asking for anything in return. A week passed. The silence that followed was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. No calls, no texts, no guilt trips, just emptiness. But somehow that silence felt more deafening than any of the noise they'd thrown at me before. Then came the social media posts. The first one was from Mom, subtle but still cutting. A photo of her and Dad sitting on the porch, smiling. The caption read, "We gave everything to our children, but sometimes giving isn't enough." There were dozens of likes, a few concerned comments, and then one from Mason. "Some people think family is about money. They forget it's about showing up." It was like a slap across the face. I closed the app before I could do anything rash. My blood was boiling, but I kept my cool. It wasn't worth it. The narrative they were creating was one where I was the villain, the one who turned my back on my family. Then Dad posted his own message. This time there was no subtlety. We gave everything to our children: time, money, love. We thought we raised them right. But in the end, you can't control who turns their back on you. He tagged me, just like that. No message, no call. Just a public post for the world to see. I didn't respond. I watched as the post gathered dozens of likes, friends from high school, people I hadn't spoken to in years, commenting on how amazing my parents were. One even wrote, "This generation just doesn't understand sacrifice." And then there was Mason again. He shared Dad's post with his own caption, "Some people only care when they're getting something." I'd give anything to protect Mom and Dad. I guess not everyone sees family that way. I read it twice, and I felt something break inside me. The same man who hadn't paid rent in years, who had drained every dollar they had left, who had watched the house fall apart, was now painting himself as the hero of the story. The comments were worse. "You're such a good son. Your sister should be ashamed. They gave her everything. She just wanted more." They didn't know the truth. They didn't want to know the truth. They just wanted the story that fit their narrative. But I wasn't going to be a part of it anymore. I was done. I might have still let it all pass. I might have let the storm pass over me and kept quiet. But then I saw her name, Kelly, my cousin, the one who used to tell me, "You're the glue in this family." She liked the post, no comment, no words, just a heart emoji. That hit harder than anything else. Maybe because I thought she understood. Maybe because I thought she saw me for who I was, and not just who they made me out to be. I closed my laptop. I sat in the dark for a while, feeling something break inside me. A quiet, final click. It wasn't loud or messy. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it was the moment I knew. They weren't just rewriting the story. They were erasing me from it. The next few days passed in a haze. I didn't reach out. I didn't reply. They came to my apartment on a Thursday, as I should have expected. They showed up because their messages hadn't worked. The guilt trip hadn't worked. The money requests hadn't worked. So they showed up, hoping I would cave. The front desk called at 10:42 a.m. "Ms. Rivers, your parents are here, and a man who says he's your brother." I stood there for a moment, staring at the floor. I didn't answer. They said they'll wait, and I let them. I walked downstairs, slowly, not out of any hurry, but because I knew the moment I stepped into that room, everything would change. The door opened, and there they were, Mom, Dad, and Mason. Mom was standing stiffly, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. Dad stood upright, his usual stern posture, ready to lecture. Mason looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They turned when they saw me, no words at first, just eyes locked on me, as if waiting for me to break, waiting for me to fold. "Danielle," Mom said, voice already high, the tension in it obvious. "We need to talk." I didn't respond right away. I simply stood there, arms crossed, calm, waiting. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being angry. I had let my anger fuel my decisions for far too long. Now I just wanted the truth to be clear. Dad cleared his throat. "You'd really let us lose the house over this?" His voice was laced with disbelief and a hint of blame. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel guilty. "Then you really thought I wouldn't?" I said, my voice cool and level. It felt like I was hearing the words from a distance, as if I were someone else, detached from this conversation, seeing them for what they truly were. Just words, empty and desperate. Dad opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "You left me out. You handed everything to Mason." Their silence was deafening. There were no excuses left, no rationalizations, nothing they could say to take back the years of unspoken obligations. "You had me always, but you chose him, and now you're here. asking me to be your safety net. Again. I took a step closer, narrowing my eyes. You used my strength as an excuse to overlook me, to never truly see me. Mason mumbled something under his breath. It was hard to catch, but I didn't need to hear it. I already knew the truth. He wasn't the one who needed saving. He was the one who had been holding them back. Dad's hands were on his hips now, irritated. We fed you, raised you. You owe us something. I almost laughed. Owe them something? I've been paying that debt every month, every year, I said, and you erased me anyway. Mom's lip quivered. She was losing her grip. We didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice cracking. Then why did you wait for me to disappear before realizing I was the one holding it all up? I asked. The words were harsh, but they were the truth. The room fell into silence again. This time it wasn't the quiet I was used to. This was different. This was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. A silence that screamed the truth of everything we had become, everything that had led to this moment. Mason shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between me and the door. He reached out, almost instinctively, to open it. I held up a hand, stopping him. Don't, I said firmly. You're not coming up. You're not coming in. Not this time. I won't be your answer anymore. No shouting, no accusations, no drama, just a firm, unyielding boundary. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. They stood there, 3 people who used to be my family, and I stood my ground. I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't looking for their understanding. I was done trying to prove myself to them. This was my final stand. They didn't lose me when they changed the will. They didn't lose me when they decided I wasn't worth the effort. No, they lost me long before that, when they believed I would always be there. When they assumed my silence meant I would never walk away. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't need to. The silence I gave them was louder than any words I could have said. For the first time, it wasn't about me being the strong one who fixed everything. It was about me choosing not to show up anymore. I didn't hear from them for a while. A week passed, no calls, no texts. The quiet stretched on, and for once, it felt like relief. I had been waiting for them to feel the weight of what they had done to me, and finally they did. But then came the texts. The guilt started to creep in. Mom's messages were soft at first, asking if I was okay, apologizing for not understanding. Dad's texts were colder, demanding answers, blaming me. And then there was Mason. His voice stayed mostly silent, but I could feel the judgment behind his words. One last text came from him. You think this makes you better? Walking away. I didn't answer. A few days later, I went for a walk. No particular destination, just walking to clear my head. Without thinking, I found myself standing outside the house where I grew up. The yard was overgrown, the porch swing I had fixed was gone, and the wind chime I'd replaced had fallen silent. There was a for sale sign on the lawn, its paint peeling like everything else. I stood there for a moment, not wanting to get closer. I didn't need to see inside to know what had happened. I didn't need to see the ruin. I had seen it all along. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the familiar vibration pulling me back to reality. But I didn't check it. I already knew what it would say. I let the phone buzz again, then again, until it stopped. I pulled it out. Missed call from Mom. Missed call from Dad. Voicemail. I knew who it was from. I knew what it would say. But I didn't need to hear it. I already knew the truth. I put the phone back in my pocket and turned away from the house. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't upset. I was free. As I walked home, the cool autumn air felt like freedom. There was no guilt, no weight on my shoulders. I wasn't their backup plan anymore. I wasn't anyone's plan. I was my own. And that was enough. If they once counted on my silence but forgot my name, that was their mistake. Because some of us never raised our voice, but we never disappeared.